Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so today's screencast, we're going to kind of do our second half of credit. So we kind of got introduced to credit and the different types of credit before, we had a little break there from our normal classes. So what we're going to talk about today really is kind of like the positives and negatives of credit buying within the United States. So I want to start with something that is pretty important because this idea of a credit score is going to follow you for your entire life, essentially. So I wanted to make sure that you had a good understanding of what a credit score is and how it's determined, and really what that means for you as a consumer and a potential, participant in the United States economy. So first thing to kind of understand here is like what exactly is a credit score. So you can have a credit score really from anywhere up to a score of 800 down to really like a score of somewhere around like 300. Is really like your normal range as far as like a credit score is concerned. Most people typically fall somewhere in the range of between like mid 500s to like around like 700 is like a typical credit score. Now, what exactly is a credit score? So you have a couple different companies that essentially what they do is they collect data on you as basically as somebody who is taking on credit in the economy. And essentially they follow your history as somebody who's been taking loans and having credit cards throughout your lifetime. And essentially what they're doing here, what this score refers to, is really how reliable are you as somebody to loan money to. In other words, do you successfully take on credit within the United States? Do you have a credit card? Do you take loans for your cars, loans for your house? And then if you do that, how successful are you at paying back that credit or those loans on time with the parameters that are laid out in the contract that you've been signing? And that's essentially how you get your credit score. Now, important things to kind of keep in mind. What do they take into account when they create somebody's credit score? So one is, number one, your history over time, right? How reliable are you at paying back your loans over time? So that's the first thing. Second thing is, do you have a history at all? If you don't have any history, that's a bad thing. Essentially, that's going to lower your credit score because then you're kind of falling into that unreliable category. Of somebody who they can't trust to kind of loan money to. Third thing they're kind of taking a look at is like the level of types of, loans and credit that you can pay back successfully. Like, do you have multiple loans going at the same time? Can you pay them back? Do you have a credit card? Can you pay back your credit card? Maybe you have a home loan, a bigger loan that you can pay back. Showing that you can pay back multiple things kind of increases your credit score as well. There's a lot of different sophisticated factors that kind of go into determining your credit score, but I want to give you guys like a general idea of it. If you look here, right, this is showing you the different generations of Americans and their credit scores. Now, what you should notice is that the older Americans have better credit scores than younger Americans, right? So Generation Z, this is kind of like technically like your generation. Then you have the millennials, Generation X, baby boomers, and the silent generation is like your World War II generation. Now, there's a couple different factors here, so you have to think about why do you think these older Americans have better credit scores than the younger Americans? Could it be the way that they approach their finances, the amount of debt and credit that they take on? That could definitely play a factor in it. Maybe the mentality of Americans has changed over time. The other big factor I think kind of playing into it is age. The older you are, the more of a credit history you have, which helps to increase your credit score. So it might not be that your generation has like bad spending habits and can't pay back their credit or takes on too much credit. It could just be that they're like an unknown factor to a lot of these lenders, and therefore that kind of like decreases their credit score because they're an unknown factor. This I just thought was kind of interesting, credit score by state. And so if you notice here, so like the darker green is kind of like states that generally people have better credit. If you notice, like the upper Midwest has like your best credit in the country, which I found to be kind of interesting. A lot of your southern states have some poor credit, but also We're not that fantastic either in New York. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing geographically. Maybe there's cultural factors to it as well as to like how much debt different, states or people in different states are willing to kind of take on. Okay, so what we're really going to kind of focus on with the rest of our lesson is like, is this credit-based system that America kind of lives in, is it a good thing or a bad thing? The first thing you want to understand, and I would definitely write down, is that basically almost all Americans are in some form of debt. I'm going to repeat that. Basically, almost all Americans are in some form of debt. They're using credit cards, they're taking loans for their homes, taking loans for their cars. They're in some form of debt, and that's almost every American. Very few Americans are living kind of debt-free. So if that's maybe like a lifestyle that you want to pursue, you want to think about like maybe, well, how do I avoid kind of like a lot of these pitfalls that some Americans are falling into? Now, it doesn't mean that a credit-based system, a debt-based system is a bad thing. It could be a good thing. So as we kind of go through the lesson and we go through the screencast today, try and write down things that you think are positive about credit-based buying and the debt that Americans are in, and negatives about it as well. So maybe like split your page into two different columns. All right, so first graphic we're going to take a look at is a pretty simple one. This one is showing you income levels in the United States, or net wealth levels within the United States, and then the amount of credit card debt that they have. So like the number inside the pink bar part of the graph is showing you how much credit card debt they have, and the bottom is showing you like the net worth of the household. So you see some interesting things. At the bottom, the very bottom has the most credit card debt. But then so do like wealthier Americans have credit card debt as well. So like the average home is carrying somewhere between like $5,000 to $6,000 in credit card debt. So that's pretty significant. That's a significant amount of debt in credit cards. Now, you have to evaluate, is that a good thing? Is this acceptable that Americans are buying and carrying debt over? So remember we talked the other day about paying your minimum payment or not paying the maximum payment. Basically, most Americans are doing this in some fashion. They're carrying debt over and they're using their credit card and not paying their full payments off. So you have to kind of evaluate that and see like, well, how do I see this as far as positives and negatives within the United States? What effect does this have on American society? On the one hand, it drives consumer purchases, which is a big part of our economy. So we're kind of experiencing that now. If you take a look at, let's say, for example, what we're experiencing with the coronavirus, one of the reasons our economy is declining so rapidly is because Americans are not making consumer purchases. Americans are still buying necessities, right? But we're not buying those extra luxury items that we've been purchasing before. And we're also not leaving to go and like do things that are considered more like entertainment and luxuries, like sporting events and going to restaurants. You can still survive without those things. And Americans are surviving without those things, but it's not necessarily helping the economy to grow. So on a positive side, like maybe some of this credit buying is helping the American economy to grow. All right. Other interesting things. So like this is showing you, again, consumer credit per person, but this is showing you over time. And I think this is a fascinating one because as you guys know, I love history. And so like this is 1952 America. The average credit debt per person in America. And then this is 2017, the average debt. So I misspoke a little bit earlier. So it's actually higher per person. Somewhere around the range of like $10,000 credit debt per person. In 1952, it's near zero. It's basically the average credit debt is maybe like $100 in the country. So like you have to again analyze this. What do you think this means? You think that Americans have become more comfortable spending on credit? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What does that mean for the health of our economy overall and the sustainability of our economy? All right, this one I also find to be kind of a fascinating chart. So this one is taking a look at the types of debt that Americans basically hold. And the thing that stands out to me, I'm not sure what stands out to you about it. I want you to take a minute and just like analyze it, maybe pause the video and analyze it. But the thing that stands out to me really is the biggest growing type of debt in America is student loan debt. and that's seen a 297% growth essentially since 2003. So that's an incredible amount of growth. The other types of debt in certain cases have declined or stayed relatively flat. So I guess the question here is, do you think student loan debt, is that good for the United States? Is that good for the country, bad for the country? You've seen a lot of presidential candidates talk about it. So you had Elizabeth Warren, that was a big part of her campaign, and Bernie Sanders was eliminating the student loan debt that a lot of millennials hold completely. How do you guys see this? Because it is an investment in the future. Is getting student loans, is that a good type of debt? Not a good type of debt? How do you feel about that? Because we talked about good debt and bad debt, in our last lesson on credit. But it's definitely the biggest expanding field of debt in America. This also is showing you kind of over time, which is showing you what you could buy with the US dollar. So this is showing you compare from 1900 to 2010. So we're kind of like a little bit beyond, about 10 years beyond this at this point. Essentially, though, what this is showing is that what you could purchase with the $100 today, in this case 2010, would be what you could purchase with a $3.64 in 1900. So it shows you that basically the power of the dollar has declined over time, and that's due to all of this credit buying. Now that, in certain sense, it's a bad thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing overall, because if you look at it compared with this subsequent graph, what's happened in the same time period is an expansion of U.S. GDP, and you kind of see a dip here in the modern era. But you have kind of seen overall from World War II beyond this, massive expansion of America's GDP, and you could maybe tie some of that to kind of moving off the gold standard in one sense, but then also kind of this easy credit that's available, and Americans are willing to kind of purchase things on credit when in the past, they weren't willing to purchase things on credit. So I think it's interesting. I want you guys to try and take in all this information, try and analyze it a little bit. And try and take into account, what you think about, is this a positive or is this a negative? Now, I just thought that this information was kind of interesting as well. So it's kind of surveying people, do you shop based off of what you see, like a post or a tweet? Only 28% said that they did that. Think to yourself, have you ever done this before and purchased things based off of something you've seen online? How often do you purchase things you don't need? So 70% of Americans say, occasionally I do that. Again, think about that in our current time period. How many people are cutting back those unnecessary purchases? Who's leaving their house to go buy something for an unnecessary purchase? Nobody. Maybe they're or very few people. Maybe they're buying it online, these unnecessary purchases, but they're really kind of scaling this back. What element of our economy is built off of these unnecessary purchases, and how instrumental is that to our growth of our economy? And then this is when it's just kind of on sale. You purchase it because it's on sale, and I think we've all kind of fallen prey to this at some point. You go into a store, you buy something you don't necessarily need, but it's on sale, so therefore it kind of incites you to go out and purchase something. So what I want you guys to do is kind of take this all into account with your evaluation of the American economy, especially taking into account our current economic situation. And is this idea of credit buying, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing for our country and our society, that it plays an integral role in our economic standing and our economic growth and outlook as a nation? All right, we will pick up with our next lesson, probably taking a look at some other forms of credit like home buying and mortgages.